Hi, I'm Kaylin. When my father died, I didn't ask for much, just 3 days to bury him, but my sister-in-law, who also happened to be my boss, looked me dead in the eye and said, "Choose, work or family." That was the moment I realized I didn't belong to either. What they didn't know was that I walked away with something they never valued, something worth $39 million. And by the time they realized what was gone, it was far too late. Before we begin, tell me this. Have you ever been forced to choose between your job and your family? What would you have done in my shoes? Drop a comment below. I read everyone. I drove straight from the hospice, the smell of antiseptic still clinging to my coat, a sealed white envelope clutched in my hand. Inside was the eulogy I'd written at 3 a.m. while Dad's breathing hitched through a plastic mask. The words felt too fragile to email, too personal to print twice, so I carried the only copy like a relic as I stepped into the headquarters of Wilder Technology. Vera, my sister-in-law, my boss, and lately self-appointed gatekeeper of the family legacy, occupied the glass-walled conference room at the center of the floor. 2 junior execs flanked her, laptops open, faces eager. Through the glass she saw me but motioned for me to wait, a single manicured finger lifted without apology. I stood there, envelope sweating in my palm, until she finally waved me in. She didn't rise. She didn't even close the slide deck of projected revenue numbers. "We're up against a hard deadline, Kaylin. Make it quick." I sat, swallowing the metallic taste of sleeplessness. Dad passed at dawn. I need 3 days to arrange the funeral and settle Mom. Vera tapped her stylus where a bar chart showed a bright green arrow. "You're either committed to this acquisition or you're not. Family can wait. The market won't." The way she said family, like it was a hobby, knocked the air from my lungs. I laid the envelope on the table, hoping the weight of it would remind her Dad had been her mentor too. She glanced down, flicked it with a manicured nail, and the envelope slid off the polished oak onto the carpet. "Then you've made your choice," she said, voice even, eyes already on the next slide. Heat flared behind my eyes, but I refused to let tears have the room. I bent, picked up the envelope, brushed off invisible dust. A junior exec offered a sympathetic half-smile before dropping his gaze. Loyalty has a hierarchy. I left without another word, my reflection in the glass walls trailing grief and something sharper. Anger that still didn't have a name. Dad's memorial took place 2 days later in a modest chapel across the river in Alexandria. The pews were thin. No one from the company came. Not even my brother Dean, too busy finalizing Vera's deal to carry Mom's tissues. I delivered Dad's eulogy to the echo of stained glass saints, voice steady until the last line. He taught me that silence can be generous, but never let it be permission. My throat broke on the final consonant. After the service, while arranging wilted lilies, I overheard a board member's wife near the vestibule. "Vera says Kaylin's stepping down soon anyway. Maybe it's for the best." She spoke the way people discuss repainting a guest bathroom. Grief twisted into a harder, colder thing. They were moving on. No, they'd been preparing the minute Dad's monitor flatlined. His youngest daughter, the emotional one, was now a scheduling inconvenience. That night, I sat at the kitchen table of my childhood home, Mom already asleep upstairs, her breathing deep and exhausted. The envelope lay in front of me, edges frayed from Vera's dismissal. My phone buzzed, an unknown number. I almost ignored it. Another florist, another distant cousin, until a familiar voice, gravelly with age, filled my ear. "Kaylin? It's Walter Finch, your father's old counsel. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you, Mr. Finch," I whispered. "He left something for you. A provision in the original founder's trust. He asked that you see it privately, away from the board." Papers rustled over the line. "Your father didn't leave everything to them?" My heartbeat thudded in my ears. "What is it?" "A set of keys and a clause the others never bothered to read. You'll want to come by first thing." I ended the call, fingers resting on the envelope. Dad hadn't stopped believing in me. even when the company I helped build treated me like a placeholder. I pressed the paper to my chest, feeling its fragile weight against the ache there. For the first time since the hospice, tears came, not from loss, but from the spark of a possibility I thought had died with him. The morning after the funeral broke gray over Fairfax County. Mom was still sleeping when I eased the sedan out of the driveway, the tiny brass ring of keys Walter Finch had mailed resting on the passenger seat. I drove east, past strip malls not yet awake, replaying his message. "It isn't on any company record. He wanted only you to see it." The storage facility sat behind a shuttered carpet warehouse. I gave my name. The clerk handed over a clipboard and waved me down a corridor that smelled of cardboard and old rain. Unit 17 clicked open on the second key. Fluorescent lights flickered alive, revealing metal shelves, 2 dusty filing cabinets, and an IBM briefcase bearing a peeling label, Founders Agreement, 1996. I carried the case to a folding table, fingers trembling less from grief than curiosity. Inside, manila folders, Dad's tidy penmanship, and a crisp addendum dated 5 years ago, months after his second stroke, when everyone assumed he'd stopped caring about bylaws. A clause sat highlighted in yellow. If a majority shareholder denies reasonable bereavement leave to any founder or direct descendant, voting privileges transfer to the minority founder pending ethics review. I read it twice, the words settling like weight on my ribs. Dad hadn't trusted the board, or maybe he hadn't trusted Vera's ambition. Either way, he'd sketched a lifeline and hidden it where only faith and blood would find it. The second folder held a revision stamped executed. He'd updated the trigger clause during his final hospital stay. Shaky handwriting, but legally intact. I imagined him convincing a notary beside whirring machines, determined that his youngest wouldn't be shoved aside. Sunlight slanted through the unit's vent as I locked up. By noon, I was in Arlington, sitting across from Gerald Baker, the firm's senior counsel who once argued patent cases for Dad. Gerald glanced over the clause, lips pursed. "If this provision holds, you can freeze the board with one notice," he said. "They'll fight, but the language is tight." I signed the engagement letter. No fanfare, just a thin blue stroke of ink. Gerald filed the motion through the state corporate portal while I watched the progress bar crawl. There was no thrill, only relief, like setting a bone that's been out of place too long. Late afternoon traffic crawled across the Key Bridge. I rehearsed possible responses from Vera and Dean, none flattering. At a red light, I composed a single-line email, subject blank. Per Clause 8.2 of the Founders Agreement, I hereby freeze all pending executive actions until further review. No greeting, no sign-off. I pressed send as the light turned green. Back home, golden dusk pooled through the kitchen windows. Mom had gone to bed early, exhaustion wrapping her like a quilt. I took Dad's leather-bound journal from the buffet drawer and sat at his old teak desk. Toward the back, on a page creased from rereading, he'd written, "They see you as small because you never needed to scream. Remember, the quiet choice is often the loudest power." His handwriting wavered, but the intent cut clean. I closed the journal, resting my palm on the cover as if it were his shoulder. The house settled around me, floorboards ticking, refrigerator humming. Outside, cicadas thrummed unseen. I opened my laptop, refreshed my inbox. No reply from Vera, but a delivery receipt confirmed she'd read the message at 5:12 p.m. sharp. I pictured her staring at the clause number, realizing the ground had shifted beneath her stilettos. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt anchored. Dad had left me more than stock certificates. He'd given me permission to call a thing by its rightful name. Betrayal didn't have to be loud, neither did reclamation. That was the night I stopped waiting for permission, and quietly started taking back everything that was mine. I didn't sleep, but dawn arrived anyway, slipping through the blinds the color of old nickel. By the time commuters clogged Route 50, I was already in the garage beneath Wilder Tower, hands steady on the steering wheel, heart even steadier. Last night I promised myself I'd stop waiting for permission. This morning I planned to prove it. The quarterly board meeting always began at 9 sharp. I rode the elevator alone, listening to the soft whir of cables and the softer echo of Dad's words in my mind. quiet choices, loud power. The doors opened to level 20. People glanced up, then looked away, as if my grief were contagious. Inside the glass conference room, Vera occupied the head seat as though it were a throne. Her tablet lay flat, knuckles pale against the bezel. Dean sat 2 chairs down, fixating on a bottled water label like it contained the answers to everything he'd avoided saying. The air smelled of citrus cleanser and unspoken alliances. I took the chair nearest the windows without waiting to be offered one. Vera's gaze flicked toward me, no greeting. "Let's begin," she said, voice polished like chrome. Slides flashed, quarterly margins, user acquisition, phrases she loved to pronounce aggressive growth. She'd barely moved to the next graph when the door opened. Thomas Reed, lead counsel, stepped in carrying an envelope with the company seal. He handed it to her without a word. Vera slid it, scanned the single sheet, and stiffness rippled down her shoulders. The silence felt thick enough to hold its shape. Thomas cleared his throat. Per legal directive, voting privileges for executive actions are suspended under Clause 8.2, signed by founding shareholder Kaylin Wilder Morgan. A whisper traveled around the table, one ripple after another. Someone exhaled the word, "What?" as though it might answer itself. Vera attempted a smile that never reached her eyes. "This is symbolic, nothing more." But her fingers tapped the table in a frantic code. A younger board member, Elliot, brought in after my last maternity leave, blinked at me. "Wait," he said, cautious but curious. "She's still a founder?" My pulse stayed level. Apparently, symbolic founders still sign legally binding documents. I slid a folder across the glossy surface. Its tab read, Clause 8.2, revised and notarized. The gold seal caught the recessed lights. Flash memory surfaced. My first return from parental leave years ago. I'd scrolled the digital annual report while nursing a newborn, searching for my name. It wasn't there. When I asked, Vera laughed lightly, saying, "Legal must have trimmed the list for readability. Nothing personal, Kay." The next quarter, my title shifted to advisor, a word that sounded respectful until you realized it came with no vote. They hadn't fired me. They'd painted me transparent. Now the paint was peeling. The room's temperature seemed to drop. Vera gathered composure like fabric. "Kaylin, this grandstanding hurts all of us, investors especially." I opened the second folder, thick, tabbed, stamped audit request, compensation and ethics. "I asked for 3 days to bury my father. You chose quarterly earnings over common decency. I'm choosing not to disappear." Dean finally met my eyes. His voice cracked. "You can't be serious." "I'm as serious as the clause you never read," I answered, soft enough that heads leaned in. "You once told me family titles don't matter here, that I was welcome only if I stayed useful. Today, I'm reminding you I'm useful and I'm an owner." Elliot scribbled notes. 2 directors exchanged looks, weighted with self-preservation. Reed remained near the door, neutral as a courthouse step. Vera exhaled through her nose. "This will stall the acquisition. Stock could slip." "Then maybe the stock needs to learn respect," I said. Meeting adjourned. I rose first. Chairs scraped as others hesitated, unsure whom to follow. Dean half stood, half sat, torn between blood and marriage. I walked out, pulse still even. In the hallway, my reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar. Angry, yes, but steadier than I'd ever seen. Behind the closed door, voices erupted. Questions about rights and bylaws, concerns about optics. I didn't stop. My phone buzzed with a text from Human Resources. "We've received your audit packet. Please confirm delivery." I slipped the device back in my purse. Waiting at the elevator, I glimpsed Vera through the frosted glass. Her confident veneer fractured, jaw tight against words she hadn't practiced. That was the first crack, and I wasn't about to stop there. I left the 20th floor before curiosity could drag me into side hall gossip. Elevators were slow after 9, so I took the service stairs, counting each step as if it were a metronome, marking the end of Vera's certainty. 2 flights down, A maintenance door stood ajar. Joan Tran waited inside, phone tucked to her ear, sneakers tapping a restless rhythm on concrete. She ended the call when she spotted me. "Conference room C is free for 20 minutes, she said, her voice just above a whisper. I masked the calendar so it shows HVAC inspection. We slipped through a back corridor that smelled of printer toner and stale coffee. Once inside the small, windowless room, Joan opened her laptop. Rows of numbers glowed on the screen, columns headed Shell Allocations 2016-2022. "You pulled all that without tripping their security?" I asked. Joan shrugged. "Your father's admin token never expired. They hid the account under an equipment lease file. Rookie mistake." I sat, steadying my breath while she scrolled. "Show me the worst of it." She highlighted 3 lines. First, an advisory travel fund reimbursing first-class tickets to Florence, St. Bart's, and Jackson Hole, totaling $2.6 million. Second, $7.8 million in bonuses to a consulting firm owned by Vera's cousin, a man who once asked me if servers ran on regular gas. Third, company Amex charges for handbags labeled Team Development. My jaw tightened, but anger stayed cool, deliberate. "Download everything to a secure drive," I said. Joan slid a thumb drive across the table. While files transferred, memory tugged me backward. 2 months before Dad passed, I'd opened an email that arrived at 3:07 a.m. His subject line read simply, "Just in case." The attachment had been encrypted. The password was the year I was born. Inside, a single PDF, Family Protection Clause, Founding Equity. I hadn't understood its urgency until Vera tossed my envelope to the floor. Now the clause felt like a lighthouse beam cutting through fog. Transfer complete, Joan clicked a folder marked Personnel Flags. Near the bottom, she paused. "You may want to see this." An entry glared from the list. Bereavement leave denied. Flag, insubordination. My request had been reduced to a disciplinary note. I read the line once, twice, a third time, each pass draining warmth from my hands. "They wrote me up," I muttered, "for wanting to bury my father." Joan handed me a red pen. I circled the sentence, slow, deliberate strokes that bled through the paper. No tears came. Something about seeing humiliation catalogued so neatly dried my grief into a fine, sharp point. "We have enough for a forensic referral," Joan said. "Not yet," I replied. "First, we let the system devour its own secrets." I compressed the most incriminating spreadsheets into a single PDF, stripped metadata, and renamed it Ethics Report Alpha. Then I opened the company's anonymous hotline portal, ironically implemented after a seminar I once championed, and attached the file. My cursor hovered over the submit button. "Ready to pull the pin?" Joan asked. "I'm not pulling anything," I said. "I'm just letting gravity do its work." I clicked send. The confirmation banner popped up. Submission received. We exited separately. I took the main hallway. Joan returned through the service route. At my desk, I composed a neutral memo to Human Resources. Per audit protocol, please confirm receipt of confidential materials submitted 09:42 a.m. Formal enough to be boring, precise enough to rattle. Before shutting down, I opened Dad's journal to the page where he'd taped a grocery receipt. Beneath it, he'd written, "The smallest slip can sink the largest ship." I pressed my fingertips to the ink, drawing steadiness from each letter. My phone buzzed. An auto-reply from the ethics portal. "Thank you for helping us foster integrity." I almost laughed at the irony. Integrity might finally visit Wilder Tech, but it was arriving in handcuffs. Wind rattled the office windows as I walked toward the elevator bank. Somewhere above, Vera was likely raising her voice, demanding explanations. Those walls were thick, yet not thick enough to muffle the coming fallout. I didn't need to shout. The documents would speak, louder than any accusation. Inside the elevator, descending alone, I watched floor numbers blink by, 19, 18, 17, each one a quiet drumbeat. When the doors opened to the lobby, I stepped into late morning sunlight feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The real storm didn't come from me, it came from the inside. The real storm didn't come from me, It came from the inside, and it arrived with the morning news ticker while I sat at my kitchen counter, mug warming my palms. Prominent tech firm under internal ethics review scrolled beneath a panel of sleepy anchors. Seeing the company name, my family's name, paired with the word ethics felt like justice finally pronouncing itself in daylight. I muted the television and opened my laptop. Overnight, the anonymous file I'd fed into the hotline had ignited a chain I could track in timestamps. 2:07 a.m. Automated routing to compliance. 2:14 forwarded to outside counsel. 3:52 flag set to level red. By now, the executive floor would be buzzing like a hornet nest prodded by a stick. Across town, that hornet nest was indeed in chaos. A friend in HR texted one line, "People are whispering your name like it's classified." 5 minutes later, another message followed. "Vera just demanded to know who leaked the audits. She's fuming." I changed from sweats into a blazer and dark jeans, then drove to headquarters. The lobby's usual hush was fractured by pockets of employees murmuring near the cafe line. One young developer held his phone up to a coworker, headline blazing. Our eyes met. He straightened, unsure whether to acknowledge me. I gave a polite nod and kept walking. The elevator doors opened to level 20 and released a wall of anxious chatter. In the corridor outside the boardroom, voices spilled through cracked glass. Unauthorized equity flows. Reporter wants comment in an hour. Who approved those travel reimbursements? They're outrageous. Then Vera's voice, sharp enough to slice. Find out who planted this fiction before noon. Fiction. A convenient word when facts turn feral. I bypassed the commotion and took a side hall to compliance, where a red light above the security door blinked like a cautious heartbeat. Inside, 3 staffers clustered around a workstation. One of them, Clara, junior officer with reading glasses perched halfway down her nose, looked relieved to see me. "Ms. Morgan," she whispered. "The board requested an emergency meeting at 10. They've already frozen the advisory travel fund." I nodded. "Good. Keep tracing recipient accounts. The Shell consultant listed as R. Hartley Business Development is Vera's cousin." Her eyebrows lifted. "That explains the Cayman routing." At 9:40, a silent alert pinged my shareholder dashboard, a discreet vibration on my phone. High-level audit status. Escalated. Exactly as planned. Through the glass wall, I watched Vera pace, tablet in hand. Dean trailed her, attempting calm, but she waved him off. When the outside attorney, Mr. Carlson, arrived with a stack of binders, Vera's face drained. Cameras flashed from someone's phone in the hallway. The story was already growing legs. 10 o'clock. The board assembled in a smaller conference room for compliance review. I slipped into a seat halfway down the table, neither at the head nor the foot. Visible, unignorable. Carlson summarized the leak, then clicked to a slide that read, "Bereavement leave denial. Insubordination flag." The words projected across Vera's blazer like a stain. Clara read from a printout, voice steady. "Employee requested 3 days to bury her father. Request denied. Reason, insubordination." No one spoke. Even the HVAC seemed to hush. Finally, an older director cleared his throat. "Is this how we treat our founding family?" Another whispered, "We could lose investors over this." Vera tried to pivot. "This was HR procedure. Timing was unfortunate, that's all." Carlson lifted a brow. $7.8 million in phantom bonuses is also unfortunate." He flipped a page. The numbers spoke louder than any raised voice. I offered no gloating smile, only silence that stretched until it became the dominant sound in the room. Vera's desperation showed in small betrayals. Tapping foot, quickened breath, the way she clutched her stylus like it might save her. The meeting adjourned with directives to freeze every questionable account, including the cousin's shell company. I headed to the elevator amid hushed stares. Just as the doors closed, my phone rang. Walter Finch. "Check your inbox, Kaylin," he said without greeting. "Your father anticipated this phase too." Back in my apartment, I opened the scanned document. Dad's signature looped across a stock reallocation form dated 16 months earlier. With one stroke, He'd shifted a controlling block of voting shares from a family trust managed by Vera to one managed by me, effective upon presentation of substantial ethical contravention. The company seal gleamed in the scan like a quiet oath. I leaned back, absorbing the enormity. Ownership, like grief, had many forms. This one weighed less than sorrow, but carried its own gravity. I didn't take anything that wasn't mine. I just took it back, and the proof sat glowing on my laptop while rain tapped against my apartment windows. Dad's amendment, dated 3 months before hospice, was elegant in its simplicity. Should any direct heir be sidelined through betrayal or exclusion, full voting control transfers to Kaylin Wilder Morgan. Beneath the clause, his signature curved steady and sure, as though he'd borrowed strength from knowing this day would come. Memory tugged me into the past. The last time he'd managed dinner out. We'd chosen a quiet bistro near the house because chemo dulled his appetite. He pushed a half-eaten chicken piccata aside, reached across the table for my hand. "I've watched power hollow people out," he murmured, voice sandpaper thin. "So, I put yours somewhere they wouldn't think to look." I'd smiled politely, not understanding. Tonight, the meaning landed with the solidity of oak. I dialed Harper Grant, the trust administrator, before nerves could intrude. Even at 8 p.m., he answered on the second ring. "Ms. Morgan, I was wondering when you'd reach out." "I'm invoking Clause 7C, I said. "Evidence of familial hostility has been met." "We've been holding documents in readiness," he replied. "Your father was precise. The transfer can be notarized tomorrow morning." By the time dawn slid between the blinds, empowerment had displaced exhaustion. I dressed in charcoal slacks, a navy blouse, colors decisive, not mourning. At the courthouse annex, Harper produced a slim folder. 2 signatures and a seal later, controlling interest moved quietly into my name. No confetti, no trumpets, just the clack of a stamp and a polite, "Congratulations, ma'am." Meanwhile, Wilder Tower simmered. On my drive over, notifications stacked across the dashboard, board-wide calendar invite labeled Emergency Governance Session, internal chat threads debating leadership, one blunt message from a mid-level manager. "Is Vera still in charge?" The veneer was cracking faster than I'd predicted. I arrived 10 minutes before the session. The receptionist's smile trembled when she handed me a visitor badge. My employee credentials had been deactivated weeks earlier. I clipped the badge to my jacket pocket and headed to the top floor where directors already milled with restless energy. Through the glass wall, I watched Vera confer with Dean and 2 allies, her expression tight. When she noticed me, irritation flicked across her features, quick but unmistakable. She straightened, then addressed the room. "Thank you for gathering. We'll address rumors and restore stability." Before she could continue, Director Halverson cleared his throat. "First, Vera, why wasn't the bereavement denial disclosed in risk reports?" She bristled. "It was an HR formality. Timing was unfortunate but immaterial." A murmur spread. Immaterial didn't sit well with investors who feared headlines more than deficits. I stepped forward, sliding the newly notarized document onto the table. "Pardon the interruption. This affects agenda order." Vera glanced down, color draining as she read the title, "Transfer of Majority Voting Shares, effective immediately." She scanned the signature, recognized Dad's handwriting, then mine beneath it. "You forged this?" she hissed. Harper, seated quietly near the door, rose. "I witnessed both signatures. The amendment is valid." Dean's chair creaked as he leaned away from Vera, as though distance might shield him. I remained calm. "I asked for 3 days to bury our father. You labeled that insubordination. That act met the clause's condition." A younger director muttered, "Never saw anything like this in a governance class." Halverson folded his arms. "Given the new structure, we need to recognize Ms. Morgan as controlling stakeholder." Vera opened her mouth, closed it, searching for an angle. "We have an acquisition pending. This upheaval jeopardizes everyone." "Upheaval began when Respect exited the room," I replied. "I intend to steady the company, not sink it." Silence stretched, uncomfortable but definitive. The gavel of recognition didn't strike wood, it settled in unspoken consensus. Halverson scheduled a formal vote of acknowledgement for the following week. Procedural but perfunctory now. The meeting adjourned and people filed past offering cautious nods. Dean paused beside me. "Kyle, Not now," I said gently. "There'll be time to talk when the house stops burning." Vera lingered at the head of the table, hands gripping her tablet. She tried to stand taller, to reclaim the room by posture alone. Tomorrow, we would sit in these seats again, but positions would reverse. She tried to stand. I told her to sit. This time, I was the one running the meeting. She eased back into her chair, lips pressed thin as I stepped to the head of the table. Outside, slate-colored clouds pressed against the windows, threatening a summer storm that felt perfectly timed. I tapped my pen twice for attention, the same signal Dad once used when a room needed order. "Let's begin," I said. 20 faces turned my way, some curious, some relieved, a few outright nervous. First item, confirmation of ownership. I slid copies of the notarized transfer across the polished surface. Pages whispered as directors scanned signatures and official seals. A collective breath left the room. No one dared dispute what was now indisputable. Vera spoke first. "This doesn't change operational authority. Experience matters." She tried for composure, but her voice carried a tremor only the glass walls pretended not to hear. "I agree experience matters," I answered. "That's why we're reviewing how it's been used." I pressed a key on the remote, projecting 3 exhibits: my denied leave request, screen grabs of chat messages ridiculing the grieving little sister, and the trust amendment Dad signed before he died. Gasps punctuated the silence. "I didn't walk away," I continued, voice even. "I was pushed, then painted invisible. You just never imagined I'd learn to fly." A senior VP, gray-haired and steady, cleared his throat. "Your father warned us years ago. Treat my daughter with respect. She remembers everything. We failed him." He pinched the bridge of his nose, shame visible. I nodded, absorbing his words without triumph. The weight of lost time pressed, but so did clarity. This was about repair, not spectacle. "Next," I said, lifting a leather binder, "independent forensic findings." Twist S13 landed with a dull thud as I opened to the summary page. Third-party auditors traced payments labeled Special Consulting, all routed to relatives of our current COO. A few heads snapped toward Vera. "That report is," she began. "Authenticated yesterday," I cut in. "Cross-checked by Grant & Keller, the same firm that certifies our SEC filings. Total misallocated funds, $11.5 million. Board policy requires immediate suspension pending investigation." Murmurs rose. Anger, disbelief, self-preservation calculus. The vote happened quickly. 14 for suspension, 2 abstentions, none opposed. Vera's cheeks blanched. She stood, attempting to regain height she'd never really lost. "Remain seated," I said, calm but unyielding. "Security will escort you to collect personal items. Your access terminated at the vote's tally." Her eyes, once daggers, now flickered with something closer to panic. "You can't erase me." "I'm not erasing anyone," I replied. "I'm restoring what was stolen. Trust." While security arrived, directors talked in hushed tones about stabilization plans and press statements. I answered questions briefly, set a follow-up meeting, then excused myself. The hallway outside felt strangely quiet, as if the building recognized its new equilibrium. Passing Vera's corner office, I noticed movers already boxing awards and designer stationery. I stepped inside. The space smelled of her grapefruit diffuser, the scent suddenly hollow. On the desk, a silver frame displayed a photo of Dad shaking Vera's hand the day she was hired. I studied his kind expression, then flipped the frame face down. "You used him," I whispered, voice soft enough to be a confession. "Now you've lost everything." As I turned to leave, my old workstation phone, long disconnected, rang, its shrill tone echoing in the empty cubicles. I hesitated, lifted the receiver. "Kaylin?" a voice said, urgent but unfamiliar. You don't know me, but I have information about the Norland deal. Vera altered numbers. They'll try to pin it on you unless you see what she hid. Thunder rumbled outside, answering for me. The storm wasn't over, it was just shifting focus. The phone's receiver felt heavier than plastic should. Vera filed in Fairfax Circuit Court an hour ago, the caller said, voice clipped, likely an associate sniffing opportunity. Wrongful termination. She's contesting the trust, claims your father was coerced. I appreciate the heads up, I replied, noting the number for later verification. When he began pitching representation, I hung up. Let them circle. I already had counsel who knew every skeleton in our family closet. By noon, news alerts pinged like popcorn. Leadership shakeup, founding family feud, share value slips on lawsuit rumor. I walked the corridor toward my reclaimed office, passing clusters of employees hunched over phones. Some offered quiet nods, the kind reserved for people doing hard things you're secretly glad you don't have to do yourself. At 2 o'clock, I met Walter Finch in his downtown suite, wood-paneled and smelling faintly of lemon oil. He produced a slim ivory envelope sealed with scarlet wax. Your father instructed me to deliver this only if litigation threatened the trust. Breaking the seal, I unfolded a single page. Dad's handwriting, sure, uncompromised, filled the top half. If you're reading this, she's turned the company into a weapon. Fight smart, fight with dignity. You carry the story forward, protect it. Beneath the note lay a notarized addendum reaffirming the transfer and imposing a penalty clause. Any heir contesting the trust in bad faith forfeits residual shares. Vera was about to sue herself out of the family fortune. Cold satisfaction steadied my pulse. We counterfile tomorrow, I told Walter. Breach of fiduciary duty, hostile workplace, plus the penalty clause. That evening, my comms team pushed an open letter to every employee inbox. I never sought a fight, but grief is not an asset to be exploited. I will defend our legacy, and everyone who builds it, against those who trade respect for profit. Within minutes, internal chat lit up, thumbs-up emojis, heartfelt replies, one brave soul typing, "About time someone said it." The message leaked externally, of course. CNBC framed it as see-through leadership. I let it ride. During legal prep, Twist S15 surfaced. Joan, ever diligent, emailed spreadsheets showing a $2.4 million engagement fee funneled to Vera's brother and her college roommate. The shell contract was so sloppy, it still listed Vera's executive assistant as witness. I scheduled an emergency board session. Friday morning, directors shuffled in beneath fluorescent lights, fatigue etched deep. Without preamble, I projected the payments. Gasps followed decimals. Halverson motioned for a vote. Criminal referral passed unanimously. As if choreographed, a process server stepped in, thick envelope in hand. "Ms. Wilder-Reed?" he asked. Vera froze, mascara impeccable yet powerless. Cameras from finance captured the moment. By lunch, the clip trended under Lakshgarn cousin consultant. She tried to blame bookkeeping, then HR, finally claiming sabotage. No one listened. Security escorted her out while she threatened appeals that sounded more like pleas. Late that night, the building slept, but I couldn't. I sat in the executive suite, city lights stippling the windows. My father's fountain pen lay beside the framed audit summary, as if he'd just stepped out for coffee. The silence felt less like absence, more like steady company. A knock interrupted the hush. I opened the door to find Mom, raincoat draped over her arm, hair silvered and damp. She carried a cedar box I'd never seen. Her eyes, patient yet urgent, met mine. "I think we need to talk about your father," she said softly, "and about something he never told you." I hadn't expected her, especially not with that box in her hands. Mom set the cedar box on the conference table, rainwater beading along its edges. The building's lights had dimmed for the night, leaving only the glow from my desk lamp and our reflections in the darkened window. She eased open the lid. Inside lay cassette tapes labeled in Dad's handwriting, Polaroids from the company's first warehouse, and a stack of spiral-bound notebooks I hadn't seen since high school. "He recorded everything," she whispered. Board discussions, Investor calls, mostly for posterity. But these, she tapped the notebooks, are his thoughts when the board pushed him to sideline you? Vera pressed hardest. My throat tightened as I flipped through a journal. Midway down a page he'd scribbled, "Almost let them convince me the company needed one less Wilder." Heard Kaylin calming a distraught intern at 1 a.m. "She's the soul of this place." Decision reversed. Mom's fingers trembled over a tape labeled May 3. "That night," she said, "he asked if you were happy. When I told him you'd stayed late to help a junior engineer debug code, he knew where loyalty lived." I exhaled, a knot loosening I hadn't known was there. He carried all this alone. But not anymore. She produced a sealed envelope stamped by the estate court. The final hearing was set for Friday, 2 days away. "Your father added one more clause," she said. At the courthouse, the judge, a patient woman with wire-rim glasses, read aloud Dad's last amendment. "If I ever chose to leave the company, I would retain a single asset, the 5-acre lot where his first warehouse once stood, now appraised at 12+ million. The clause dared me to define value on my own terms. I drove straight to the overgrown parcel, morning sun glinting off rusted sheet metal remnants. Whip-poor wills called from the tree line. I walked the boundary, boots crunching gravel, and felt an unexpected calm. By afternoon, I had a landscape architect on speakerphone. "I don't want another tech campus," I told him. "I want green space, open to everyone who never had a quiet place to breathe." Construction permits sailed through. City Council loved free beauty. Within months, paths wound through native magnolias, benches curved in shady arcs, and a low stone wall framed a bronze plaque. "For the builders, the forgotten, the kind-hearted." In memory of James Wilder and the daughter he finally saw. News outlets covering Vera's indictment filmed the ribbon-cutting for contrast. Her charges, fraud, conspiracy, barred her from serving on any corporate board. She emailed twice, first to justify, then to plead. I archived both without opening. Sometimes silence is the cleanest reply. On a crisp Saturday in October, I took 8-year-old Evan to the cemetery. Leaves skittered across the walkway as he balanced a shoebox containing a hand-painted model of the new garden. He knelt beside the granite headstone, setting the miniature trees just so. "Grandpa would have liked it," he declared, brushing soil from his knees. I traced Dad's engraved name, the stone cool beneath my fingertips. "He does like it," I said, looking toward the horizon where the garden's tallest oak crowned the skyline. "And I think," I added, voice soft, "he finally found peace. Maybe we both did." Evan slipped his hand into mine. We stood in silence while clouds drifted, unhurried. Life kept moving. Shareholders' meetings, product launches, PTA fundraisers, but the weight I'd carried for years was gone, replaced by something lighter, steadier. I realized the most valuable thing I reclaimed wasn't the equity or even the garden. It was the quiet certainty of my own worth. Sometimes the people who dismiss you the loudest are simply afraid of your silent power, and sometimes the greatest victory isn't the fortune you salvage, but the self you refuse to surrender. Have you ever walked away from something and found everything waiting on the other side?